Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining me today. We are talking about an issue that affects lots of families, treating attention deficit hyperactivity disorder in children. A writer from Charlotte, North Carolina shares her success with an alternative approach to medications, determined to treat the underlying causes rather than mask the symptoms. Linda Artis joins me in a few minutes. If you aren't recording this show, hit that record button now. This is information you may want for yourself or someone you care about who is struggling with ADHD children. Also today, it is a huge event in the Garden City, and moms and dads mark the date in ink on their calendars. The Trinity on the Hill Children's Consignment Clothing Sale is coming up soon. We'll hear from the coordinator about the time, the dates, and how the sale supports missions near and far. First, though, according to the CDC, doctors have prescribed medication for more than 60% of the nearly 6.5 million children diagnosed with ADHD. And while meds work for many, others are concerned about the drug's side effects and masking of symptoms. Recently, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention released a report saying parents may be the best detectors at picking up early signs of ADHD in their kids. Katie Schumacher's story reflects the CDC's findings. Her son Brian was officially diagnosed with ADHD when he was 7 years old, but it was a long journey getting to that diagnosis. Katie started suspecting Brian had the disorder when he was just 2.
I just knew something was off. His frustration level was very high and he was very defiant. And I was able to see his frustration. He said, "Everything goes through my head so fast I can't catch it." And then I realized I had to do something. So I spoke to my pediatrician. If you would have told me in the beginning of his journey that Brian would be the boy he is right now, I would say you're crazy.
Linda Artis is passionate about helping others navigate the pitfalls of ADHD and other childhood diagnoses, and she knows those firsthand. Her 2 children have been diagnosed with ADD, ADHD, and reactive attachment disorder, or RAD. And Linda, thank you for coming down from Charlotte today.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me.
RAD was new to me. Do you say RAD or RAD?
RAD typically,
RAD.
And that's mostly because that's a disorder you typically see in adopted children. And usually adopted children who have been in an orphanage or in another place for 6 months, a year. Actually, RAD is really the children's version of PTSD.
Interesting, and that brings us around to another topic here. To begin with, Linda does have 2 children, and Linda, your firstborn was through IVF.
Yes. Which
is a lot of time and money and patience, and then you were able to adopt your second child from a Russian orphanage. So clearly, you went through great lengths to become a mother. But what you have learned is that a mother's love just can't fix everything.
That's true. Mm-hmm. That's true. Yep.
I really want you to tell our audience a little bit about bringing Alexander into your family, and you'll understand the RAD.
Well, we had my daughter, and she was about 3 years old. We wanted a second child, and couldn't have one ourselves, and so we looked for adoption. We wanted a boy. We got our choice because we got to adopt. So everyone said adopt from Russia. So we looked at Russia. We did. We applied to the agencies, and Alex came up, and we went to visit at 6 months. We were going to bring him home 6 weeks later. Long story short, Russia changed their adoption laws. We ended up bringing him home 6 months later. So he was a year old when he came into the United States with us.
Wow.
And he came into our family that was peaceful and calm and loving, and he was just a hurricane that blew through and really changed our family dynamic.
Linda writes about so much of this in her book that I'm going to tell you about in just a minute. I'll show it to you right now. It's called Healing Our ADHD Children, and we are going to get to it. But I want you to know just a little bit more about how Linda got to the point in her life. Linda, you said that when you were 50, you began to realize your life purpose, and that was to make a difference in the lives of moms with ADHD children. What was your aha moment that made you decide that this is what I'm supposed to do? Share what I've learned.
Well, that's a really interesting question. I don't know that I had an aha moment. I think I had about 6 months of that. I retired at the age of 50 and thinking, as all of us might, that retirement's this amazing time that we can sit back and do everything we want to do.
Yeah.
And I really ended up being bored. And I started looking into myself and it's like, what makes me happy? What makes me joyful? What am I passionate about? And as I really started getting into that, you know, what is my life purpose? And it really started to become clear as I worked through all that. And I moved from my head to my heart, and that's when it just sort of hit that our children, my ADHD children, all the work that I had done with them, I could share with others. And yeah.
You said to me when we talked on the telephone prior to this interview that the one thing that moms really want, you get this diagnosis and suddenly it's a matter of, well, what am I supposed to do? And the doctors may have these suggestions, but you can't just, okay, well, tomorrow it's all going to be different. There's a gradual process of making changes. And you said that's where you feel like you can encourage other people.
Right. As I wrote this book, I started just putting all the information together and throwing it all into a book.
Yeah.
And it occurred to me that just like me, moms are busy, really busy people. And so I broke it out into an 8-week program to say, here's things you can do to start with, and then here's more things, and here's more things, instead of just kind of throwing it all out there, because it is a process. And I love the cover. My publisher helped with the cover, and the idea is that they're building blocks. And to help heal our kids' ADHD symptoms, it's a building block approach. Not one thing is going to heal most of these children. It's going to be a lot of different things, and my book kind of covers the base, the base of the tower.
I love that, the whole building block approach, and you do go through that so well in the book. The idea that 8 weeks can help you transform your life. Linda has written this book specifically about ADHD children, but I read it and think, oh, wow, I wish that I had done things like this with my own kids. I think I could have had so much more harmony in my home and so much more organization, and had been more deliberate about giving them specific responsibilities. And that's something that you get into about how important it all is. Linda, when you first began to get help with Alexander, you ran into just a lot of frustrating situations. And you found right away that he did okay in daycare, but home was a different situation.
Yes, it was, and that's when he first came to the U.S. and we integrated him into our household. And I wanted to go back to work part-time, and he had already in Russia been living in 4 different places over a year. And the last thing I wanted to do is bring him into my home for 2 or 3 months and then send him somewhere else for 3 or 4 hours a day while I did the work that I needed to do. So I moved him straight into daycare for like 3 hours. Right. And then brought him home. And it was almost sad. He did pretty well in daycare, because I can only imagine that in an orphanage there are just cribs lined up, one after the other after the other. And in the daycare there were only 4 cribs, but it may have at least felt the same to him.
Right.
I brought him home to our house, and I would play with him for a few minutes. His attention span was very short, which it is for 1-year-olds, but And it would broke my heart. He would crawl into the kitchen and sit and wait to be fed because he was starved. He actually, when we adopted him, when he was born, he was 8 pounds. He was a healthy baby boy.
Oh, and
And a year later, he was a little over 12 pounds.
Wow.
So he would sit and want to be fed 24/7 almost.
And then that brought up a whole other set of issues trying to feed Alexander, which you can read about in the book. We need to take a quick break. Coming up, Linda Artis will explain how her program, Healing Our ADHD Children, works and what it's meant to her family and what it could mean for you.